gets in the hands of the Ukrainians. So far, the Biden administration is still ruling that out. There are additional steps that could make it happen even faster in that way. But this is a almost unprecedented mobilization of U.S. resources into the hands of another country to try to arm them, to give them the tools that they would need to defend themselves.
Can we talk about the fact that the Pentagon seems to be opposed to sending MiG fighter jets, for example, and you talked about the difference between the more offensive weapons and the more defensive ones, if you will, and where Putin might draw the line in terms of this is now a direct attack on us and kind of draw the U.S. into war. Where is that line?
I think the line is wherever we think it is for Putin, because we're not dealing with a rational actor. We're not dealing with someone that whose intentions are fully understood. In fact, we have lots of reasons. Our intelligence agents have been saying there's reasons to think that he's not completely connected to reality. And he's got more nuclear weapons than anyone. And that's the danger that you have here. And we've made clear, I think the U.S. side has made clear throughout that the lines of communications are open with Russia. If in case there's any miscommunication, they want to be able to clarify that quickly. And I think some of it's just a calculation about what would be seen in the eyes of Putin and the world community as a provocative step that would have the U.S. directly engaged in a shooting war with Russia. That's the line that we are trying to avoid. So it means kind of sanding down some of the other barriers and making it look like we're not doing everything that we might be doing, or changing the optics around things, all these contortions of language around it. But that's what the U.S. is trying to keep from doing.
All right, we talked about supplying weapons. We talked about, of course, including that $13 billion is humanitarian aid to Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees. Of course, sanctions have been going on as well, and there's talk of broader sanctions even. Talk about what's on the table now.
Yeah, well, the big ask now is to crack down on companies and any individual that has dealings with the Russian regime. We've already gone after Putin. Of course, the many people in his inner circle, the oligarchs, many have had their assets frozen, taken away. We've seen the cratering of the Russian stock market, the Russian economy in the last couple of weeks as a result of that. But we've also seen that there are lots of countries and companies that continue to do business with Russia. It was only a week ago that we cut off oil imports from Russia. More can be done on companies that do business there. We've seen many companies choose to cease doing business there. But one thing Zelensky would like to see is a crackdown on all of those companies, because the more you choke off the financial lifelines that supply Russia, the more you isolate Putin economically, and the more that you hit him where it hurts. That's the only way that right now economically you can sort of tighten that vice.
And is that option a little more feasible now with oil prices seemingly trending downward?
I think the gyrations in the oil market, I think, are very much related to what's going on and the perceptions of what's going on. We saw President Biden today call on gas companies, oil companies, to lower the price of gasoline now that the prices are down a little bit. That might relieve some of the pressure. It might allow a little additional flexibility. The fact is, we don't get a ton of our oil from Russia directly. It's a pretty small percentage. I think it was all more about the perceptions of it. But large portions of Europe are dependent on Russian oil. So I do think that if there were a further pressure on other countries to take away that part of the supply, you would see on the world market an impact that would mean higher gas prices, even higher than they have been here at home.
All right. I want to talk about Vice President Kamala Harris, who met with the Polish president. Can you talk about the impact from that meeting and whether alliances were firmed up and misunderstandings cleared up?
Well, I think the misunderstandings around the readiness of the U.S. to supply those MiGs has been a major point of contention. The Poles said they had it all ready to go, and they thought they had the green light from us. So that's one piece of it. But the bigger concern for Poland and anyone in Eastern Europe is, what does Putin do next? Is he going to be satisfied with taking over Ukraine? Does he go after Belarus? Does other countries that could be next on the chopping block? Poland is certainly in this situation. They've got a bad history of this, and I think any reassurance, you've seen Vice President Harris say this repeatedly, that the U.S. is firmly on the side of defending that NATO alliance. Poland is a NATO member, unlike Ukraine. So that changes the calculation in terms of what our commitments would be, and the fact that we have more troops there is a piece of that as well.
All right. Ukrainian President Zelensky today really made it clear democracy is worth fighting for. Do you think it may have had an unintended effect of unifying us here in the U.S., given our deeply divisive times?
Well, I think Zelensky has to recognize the unity of the United States as something of a strength for him. I don't see him having a huge upside in dividing the country against itself about what the next step should be. And look, it was a moment that, frankly, just as an American, as a citizen, you like to see it when people can agree every once in a while, and to see the solidarity, Democrats and Republicans both standing to cheer this the fight for democracy that Zelensky is engaged in. He is almost certainly the most popular political figure in the United States, if not the world right now, a genuine hero. And I think the fact that people in both parties can take inspiration from that is probably a good thing for the Ukrainian cause, even though there's going to be disagreements along the way. You certainly see policy disagreements. You see lots of things the Republicans saying Biden should be doing. But I am struck by how much the leading Republicans are backing what Biden is doing, because what Biden is doing represents the mainstream views of how America should be acting in the world.
You know, seeing Republicans and Democrats, the lawmakers in Congress, standing shoulder to shoulder on something these days, that in itself is something to cheer for. Rick Klein, ABC News political director, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And coming up next, Stanford University economics professor Nicholas Bloom joining us to talk about what a hybrid work week will look like as more companies require workers to come back to the office. All right, everybody, I don't know if you've had to go back to the office, but you'll want to stick around for this interview to see what the new normal looks like. Be right back. The pandemic has changed so much about the way we live, including the way we work. After 2 years of working remotely, many Bay Area companies are transitioning to a new normal that involves workers returning to the office part-time. That may or may not be what Bay Area mayors and businesses are hoping for, though. Joining us to talk about what the new work week might look like, Stanford University professor of economics Nicholas Bloom, who's been studying remote work for a long time, right? Since before the pandemic made it mainstream?
That's right, for almost 20 years. And it was a very quiet topic until March 2020, and in which case it just exploded.
For 20 years, you're like, who's going to interview me? And now everybody is. Look, I need your expertise on this because a new survey by the Bay Area Council shows most Bay Area employers plan to bring workers back to the office this month, but not in the old way. What does the new normal look like? What are the permutations?
Great. So first thing is worth saying, only about a half of Bay Area employees can work from home. So if you look at it, there's like a half of folks that are frontline retail, manufacturing, essential service. Those folks have to go in and in fact have been going in full-time throughout the pandemic. So the half we're talking about are professionals, managers, folks typically deep working in tech and finance. And yes, for most of them, they are going to be going back 2, maybe 3 days a week and enjoying the other 2 or 3 days a week working from home.
Okay. I know Google's asking for 3 days on site. Tell us why you think most people find that 3 days is ideal.
Well, hybrid is kind of the best of both worlds. So there are reasons to go into work. The big two reasons are it's easier to be creative and innovative face to face, and you build culture. You see your coworkers, you get to know them, you get to know what's going on in the company. But working from home has the upside that at least post-pandemic, it will be quiet, once our kids have gone back to school, and you save on commute. In fact, you save big time on commute. The average Bay Area employee probably saves 70 to 80 minutes a day on commute. And in fact, also saves another 10 minutes because it's quicker to get ready if you're not leaving the house. So, hybrid's kind of the best of both worlds because you have these plans, like take Apple. They say, we're going to come into the office Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. You're going to have like crazy social days of meetings, events, trainings, lunches, leaving events. And then Wednesday, Friday, you guys get to work from home. It's quiet. You can do quiet reading and studying and analysis, and you save the commute on those 2 days.
Any idea like who likes remote work best, or are there demographic groups or social groups that prefer it more than others?
Well, what you see is, to be clear, a quarter of people really don't like remote at all. So in the surveys, 25% of folks say they don't ever want to work from home again. They find it lonely and isolating.
Those are the social people.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, if you look at their young singles or their older empty nesters, the young singles, you can imagine they want to go into work and, meet, partners, etc. And at the other extreme, there's about 30% that love it. And they're like, I want to work from home forever. Mm-hmm. They tend to be more like to be middle-aged with young kids living in a house with a long commute. And for them, it's pretty draining. And, working from home works pretty well.
Yeah. You mentioned the commute and the high cost of gas. Do you think it's possible that employers will start paying or reimbursing for the commute to get people back to come in more?
Maybe. It kind of cuts both ways. I've heard people saying, look, they should pay me to come in. I have to deal with the commute, etc. On the other hand, I've heard people saying, my employer should pay me when I'm at home because I'm using my own electricity, my own food, my own heating, etc. So generally, most people, actually, if you look in the surveys, ideally come in 2-3 days a week. They want to see their colleagues. They want to, socialize with coworkers and work from home 2-3 days a week. So hybrid kind of generally fits most people pretty well.
Got him. All right, this week, San Francisco Mayor London Breed announced Bloom SF, which is actually taking place March 27th week with lots of fun events to draw workers back to downtown. The reason being downtown needs workers, right? Need them to eat in restaurants, shop in stores, drink in bars for happy hour. So if they're doing 3 days a week average, all right, is getting 60% of their time and money enough to sustain cities?
Well, I don't think it's such a bad thing, to be honest, that central San Francisco is a bit less hectic. We've been becoming denser and denser and denser over the last 30 years as downtown's become more crowded. What's happening is it's actually less expensive relatively to live in downtown because people have moved out to the suburbs. There's what's called the donut effect. So loads of folks have moved out to the suburbs. Prices there have gone up, but downtown's got a bit less expensive. And, there's slightly less business activity in downtown and more in the suburbs. Maybe that's good. I can see why if you're the mayor of San Francisco, you might want people in the downtown. But if you are the mayors of the areas roundabout, you're probably pretty happy to have businesses and folks where you live too.
True. The money could just be moving out to the donut, if you will. Has working remotely brought down our productivity as a society? Is there any evidence of that?
No. So I have to say, this is the biggest surprise of the entire pandemic, at least in terms of remote working. So as I mentioned, I've been working on this for 20 years. Pre-pandemic, people would call it, working from home, shirking from home, or remotely working remotely. Turns out, from the pandemic experience and from a lot of research and data, people are actually more productive working at home. It's not a big increase, but it's something like 3 to 5%. So, astounding. And, I'd say that most people listening, much of the world has been amazed, but we see on average, we're actually better working from home.
Well, Professor Nicholas Bloom coming to us from home. I'm sure many of my colleagues are saving this interview and taking us straight to the boss. Thank you so very much for your time and insight.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, coming up next, today people across the country and here in the Bay Area are breaking the silence in a show of support for Asian American women who are often the target of violence. We'll be back with the organizer of one of the Breaking the Silence rallies. All right, everybody stick around. Hopefully you're watching from home because you get to work remotely from home. I haven't logged into Facebook yet just because we had the pre-tape interview with Rick Klein, but drop me a line. Let me know how you're working these days and I'll check them out. Thanks. Rallies are taking place in San Francisco and in cities across the U.S. today to demand justice for Asian American women who have so often become the targets of violence. This comes on the one-year anniversary of the Atlanta spa shootings in which 6 AAPI women were murdered. The San Francisco rally is underway right now outside the Asian Art Museum, and joining us to talk about it is the lead organizer and co-founder of Asians Are Strong, Zayan Chung, and also activist Natasha Kwan. Zayan and Natasha, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
The rallies across the country are called Break the Silence. Break the silence on the vitriol, the hate, the assaults on Asian Americans, but especially the women. The numbers are really alarming this past year. Can one of you share them with us?
So the report has come out that 74% of Asian women have faced racism in the past year, and also that in San Francisco Bay Area, the violence has increased five to six times in the past year.
All right. Well, this event demands justice for AAPI women. The spa workers killed were women, of course. This past week in New York, an elderly Asian woman was punched 125 times in Yonkers by a man who called her a racial slur. Last month, a man followed Christina Yuna Lee into her apartment, stabbed her to death in a crime police consider sexually motivated. Natasha, why do you think AAPI women more often end up as the targets?
So this is a complicated question, and I think part of the problem stems from stereotypes about Asian women that are long rooted in our nation's history. Stacey Abrams spoke at the Atlanta rally this morning, and she talked very eloquently about how this is not new. This discrimination against Asian Americans comes all the way from the Chinese Exclusion Acts and the Page Act, which excluded Chinese and Asian women from coming to this country because of stereotypes. And one thing that I know the California State Assembly is addressing is the need for Asian American history and an ethics studies requirement to address the history of racial struggle from all different racial groups. So I think it's a very complex question, but it's something that all of our Asian American nonprofits and grassroots that we're working with are working really hard to try to address.
All right, a lot of raising the awareness, very important. The San Francisco event has started, but the main program begins at 5 o'clock. Zain, tell us what the pre-program and the main program will offer people who attend.
Absolutely. This is an amazing place at the Asian Art Museum. So at 3 o'clock, indeed, we started off with a resource vendors fair, I would say, where we're providing a lot of resource for our API women or Asian women. For today, we're really trying to focus on how we can mourn, grieve together, but yet also uplifting on how are we moving forward. So that's the reason for these resources. And that is happening between 3 and 5. Then from 5 till 7, Natasha will be the MC. She will be then introducing some Korean traditional performances as well. We have a list of speakers, and that will go on to about 6:30, and then hopefully we can have another glimpse of all the resources that are here. We have like 15, 16 resource vendors, very amazing. So I'm very excited for, our Asian women community to see how much is out there to support them.
All right, we only have about 20 seconds, but I'd like to ask you, what do you think needs to happen in the long term to affect meaningful change? Zain?
I believe that we as a community need to come closer together. The API or API community is so big, so vast, and there's a lot of internal, healing to do, discussions that need to take place in how we can find unity and solidarity.
All right, Zain, that discussion begins tonight. Folks can go to Break the Silence outside the Asian Art Museum until 7. Thank you so much. And we want to let our viewers know you can be an ally to the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities here in the Bay Area or get help. Just go to abc7news.com/takeaction. There we have local and national resources available all in one place. We'll be right back. All right, if our guests are still with us, we'd love to bring them back. Zain and Natasha, yay, there you are. Thank you so much for getting so much great information in such a short time. I know it's short. I wonder if you can also talk about if you think in the past year, due to more attention being shed on violence against Asian Americans and there being visible allies like Stacey Abrams, have there been little seeds of hope, things that you think lead you to think that it's becoming better or we are on the right track to tackling this?
I don't believe it's better because we still see a huge amount of increase in how Asian women are targeted. As you just mentioned, over the last 2 months, it's very traumatizing. A lot of our communities don't even want to watch the news anymore because it's too hard. Every time we look at the news, we hear someone who's getting attacked in our community. So I personally don't feel there's, any improvement. Mm-hmm. Yes, we get some more awareness, but that's about it. And still it is marginalized for sure.
Yeah. Natasha, I have to say, social media doesn't help. I ran into something very disturbing today on social. Just, when you search Asian, like just the images and the stereotypes on Asian women are very insidious and pervasive.
Absolutely. And I think that, having events like this definitely builds community and solidarity, but the changes are really systemic and pervasive. And so they need to come from the policy level, changes in the law, changes in how we educate our children and future generations, because stereotypes are not something where you can just snap your fingers and fix it overnight, that there needs to be a cross-cultural understanding and an intergenerational movement to bring everyone together to say violence against anyone, any minority community is not right.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Have a great rally. I hope it'll get a lot of people thinking. Thank you so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers. We'll be here every weekday at 3 on air and on live stream answering your questions. World News Tonight is coming up next, and I'll see you back here at 4 o'clock.